often reflected that our superior intelligence has given rise to an exclusive ability to perform tasks by creating and using tools.
And what's brought us to the pinnacle and put us on the top of the food chain is our ability to create things with which we modify the environment. So if you need to make a hole, we invented the drill. If you needed to get a nail into a piece of wood, first it was a rock and then it turned into a hammer.
But it turns out that we're not the only tool users with the advantage of hands, with the dexterity made possible by an opposable thumb, and big brains. These are traits we share with the great apes. For centuries, the great apes were lumped in with monkeys and thought of as primitive and often frightening. They could also be amusing if they were tamed and trained to mimic people.
Not so long ago, human perception of chimpanzees were these were just silly animals for our entertainment. And you would see that in television shows and movies. They'd be dressed up in clothes, doing tricks even at zoos.
Like a parrot trained to talk, any skills they might happen to demonstrate would be attributed to their human role models. Monkey see, monkey do.
Fortunately, nowadays, our perception of them has changed. In 1960, Jane Goodall began the longest-running research project of wild chimpanzees. She discovered that they actually fashion, modify, and use tools. This actually made us, humans, redefine our uniqueness. And so this changed the perception of chimpanzees and other great apes.
Modern science has shown chimpanzee DNA to be nearly 99% the same as humans. They are the most gregarious of the great apes, making them the easiest to study closely in the wild. They use thin sticks as probes to poke into termite mounds. The termites bite the invading stick and are pulled out to become a protein-rich snack. To crack open hard-shelled nuts, chimpanzees use two tools at once, a hammer and an anvil.
That's actually not only embodies a quite interesting principle, it needs to be conducted in a skillful kind of a way. It's a bit like remembering eating nuts at Christmas and using the nutcrackers. If you apply the nutcrackers too vigorously, then you get a completely smashed nut. So you smash up not only the shell, but you smash up the kernel. So there's a kind of way of hitting the nut when it's sitting on the anvil in such a way that it just cracks it open nicely and you get a nice clean kernel out of it.
Chimpanzees have also been observed creating and using a sponge-like object to soak up water from hard-to-reach places.
What they'll do in the wild is they'll take leaves and crunch them up into balls similar to this fibrous browse ball here. This has been chewed by the chimps and sucked of all its nutrients. So they can dip this in, use it as a sponge, and then soak out the water. They don't necessarily use this behavior in captivity because they have water sources, but this sponge-using behavior has been observed in wild chimpanzees.
Orangutans have also been observed using sticks to probe for termites and other treats. If the stick they find is too big, they will modify their tool by stripping off or chewing away part of it to make the end smaller.
It's because of the structure of their hands that they're able to manipulate objects, to use sticks and branches, and to dig into objects. You also notice that they usually begin using their tongue or their long fingers, and then they go to the sticks to try to get the object out. Because they are so oriented to using tools, as keepers, we have to actually really be careful that we don't give them branches that are too long, that they will create a lot of mischief. They've taken apart our filter system at our pool using objects. They're very curious, very mischievous, and it's amazing how dexterous they are once they have like maybe a stick, a piece of browse that they've whittled down, and they'll actually make a nice point to it. So we have to be very careful.
Sean!
In captivity, tool use is now encouraged for mental stimulation and to fight boredom. At the Los Angeles Zoo, the apes' tool-using efforts are rewarded with tasty treats like peanut butter and yogurt. But in their natural habitats, these abilities can be an important life skill to acquire.
Tool using is a necessity to survival. There is a problem that needs to be solved, and so let's use a tool to do it. We see it in our behavior, and we see it in chimpanzee behavior, such as using rocks to crack open nuts or the twigs to fish for termites and ants. These are nutrients that they need in their diet, and it is a necessity.
When looking into the eyes of one of the great apes, you can't help but wonder, what are they thinking?
You know, ape intelligence has often been compared to human intelligence. They try to put an age upon it. Are they as smart as a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old? I hear this all the time out here. And personally, I don't like to do that. I like to think of them as intelligent as they need to be for their environment. And we need to view them as unique individual beings with an extreme level of intelligence.
Who's to say that they've reached the pinnacle of their development as some of nature's most skilled engineers? Or what skills they will acquire thousands of years into the future? One day, this really might become a planet of the apes. While having almost human hands gives the great apes a distinct advantage, it's amazing what other animals can accomplish with just jaws and claws. From subways to tunnels and lines, we have carved out a partial underground existence and have created everything from basic tools like the pick and shovel to huge boring machines, enabling us to dig deep beneath the earth. But we aren't the only mammals that create subterranean structures. A variety of species use their claws and jaws to excavate everything from simple burrows to intricate tunnel systems. There are tunneling mammals on every continent except Antarctica. Africa has some of the most exotic species, including meerkats.
Meerkats are only found in South Africa, and they're a desert species that will prey on anything that they can possibly overpower. And they'll take things like scorpions and venomous snakes and kill them and eat them.
Even though they are skilled hunters, they need to build burrows to take refuge from larger predators and to provide a safe place to raise their young. Each meerkat community is called a mob and can number up to 40. Using their powerful forelegs and long, sharp claws to dig, each mob will excavate underground dwellings consisting of entrance holes, tunnels, and sleeping chambers. Their sleeping chambers are usually 6 to 8 feet underground, deep enough to keep them cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. There may be up to 70 different entrances to each burrow system, offering plenty of ventilation and escape options. They have to dig new homes often to avoid the inevitable buildup of fleas and other parasites that accumulate in their dens. While meerkats spend most of their time each day above ground hunting and soaking up the sun of the African desert, naked mole rats have evolved and adapted to the point they never need to leave the safety of their underground existence. They don't need claws to dig because they've developed outsized pairs of constantly growing teeth that enable them to gnaw their way through hard soil. Their narrowest tunnels can be less than 2 inches wide. But one of the advantages of being furless is that they can easily squeeze past each other. Nearly blind, they're an example of how far specialization can go. Because of the lack of extremes in climate in the part of Central Africa where they dwell, they've deviated from one of the main definitions of what it is to be a mammal.
Naked mole rats are actually cold-blooded in the sense that if you take them out of their burrow and put them in a warm room, they just heat up. If you put them in a cold room, they cool down. They have no physiological mechanism left for regulating their body temperature.
Their social structure is similar to communal insects, like bees and termites. There's one queen per group and a division of labor among the rest, including soldiers and workers. Raymond Mendez became fascinated with these unique animals and brought some home with him to the American Southwest. They've become an important part of his business of creating exhibits and breeding specimens for museums and zoos.
Here we are at the studio, and look at this little baby. This is one of the mole rats that I've raised from the ones that first came in from Africa many, many years ago. And you can see everything that you might want to right there. Look, there's their teeth. See how big they are? And also look at the mouth parts, how they close up so the dirt doesn't go into their mouth but falls on the sides. And you'll notice they do have hairs, little bitty hairs, but they're more hairs for sensing the edge of the burrow, not for keeping themselves warm or cold or anything else. The eyes are very, very small, just barely little dots. And the ears are reduced. Look at them there. They're just these little openings, but they hear very well because that's how they communicate in the nest.
In the darkness of their underground world, they make chirping sounds to locate each other and coordinate their activities.
Well, actually, they sing. If you keep mole rats, or if you lived with mole rats and actually put a probe underneath them and listen, you'd hear all these little bird calls going out. And these calls travel long distances down the tunnels, and they actually tell you where there's food, where we are, come this way. If there's somebody who attacks, there's a very specific kind of a grunt and call that will bring in soldiers. So they're always communicating underground.
When excavating new tunnels, naked mole rats work as a team. The one in front chomps into the soil like a mini steam shovel.
The naked mole rats have enormous jaws where over 40% of the musculature of their body is focused. So they grind away at this soil and then they kick it back underneath them. So they make a long conveyor belt of bodies, each one kicking back. And the one that they kick towards raises up so the other one can go underneath them. So they're making this conveyor belt that's constantly moving back. And they move it through the soil for hundreds of feet. And when it finally gets to an area where they're kicking it up into a volcano, what they do is there's a kicker. And the kicker just sits there with his legs straight up, facing down, and everybody throws dirt under the kicker, and the kicker just kicks up, and this stuff just comes pluming out of the dirt like a little mini volcano.
The main reason they keep digging is they're constantly searching for enough roots and tubers to feed the colony.
Naked mole rat colonies can have over 100 individuals in them, and their tunnel systems expand over areas as big as a football field. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the ways that they think new mole rat colonies are formed. In other words, one of these branches that's out looking for food might have a collapse in the tunnel system, and they might not be able to find their way back to the main colony.
While the tunneling prowess of naked mole rats is impressive, when it comes to digging complex and vast systems, prairie dogs, rodents native to North America, are unsurpassed. They don't work as a team like naked mole rats, but the individuals work for the good of the group. Each group or family of prairie dogs is called a coterie. When several families live close together, it's referred to as a prairie dog town. At the turn of the last century, before we encroached on their territory, there was a gigantic prairie dog town in Texas that would make New York City seem puny. This sprawling rodent-filled metropolis was estimated to cover 25,000 square miles and contained up to 400 million prairie dogs.
Right behind me is a group of black-tailed prairie dogs. These were purchased for the zoo a number of years ago. Prairie dogs are considered a agricultural pest in the state of California. They're not really found here. They're found in Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, Texas, New Mexico, and in that area in the Great Plains states.
Prairie dog burrows may be anywhere from 3 to 14 feet deep and as long as 100 yards of actual tunneling space. So prairie dog may be going from these very depths of 8 to 12 feet and backing all of the soil out to the edge of the coterie.
Their tunnels lead to several hollowed-out areas, each with its own particular purpose.
Once we're into the prairie dog burrow, one of the first chambers you may find is a listening chamber. And this is where the prairie dogs can actually hear any of the predators that might be out above ground. For instance, something like a badger that is trying to get in and enlarge the hole. From there may be another chamber or two that are sort of turnaround tunnels, that are dead-end tunnels.
And there's one room that they use for a toilet. There's one room that they use as a nursery where the babies are born and that's filled with grass cuttings and what have you. It's a nice, soft, warm spot for mom and the kids.
I'm in the middle of a prairie dog ward or coterie. And in front of me is a fine example of a prairie dog entrance burrow.
See how mounded the front is. Prairie dogs do this by pounding their nose to compact the soil around the top of the entrance burrow. The mounding on the outside of an entrance burrow is threefold. One, it serves as a heightened area for a sentry to stand at the top and look for predators. Secondly, it also helps if in case of torrential rain, the burrow will not get flooded. And finally, it serves as ventilation for the coterie. And if you place your hand right over the top of the hole, you can actually feel the air movement coming out of the hole.
Most of their tunnels have two entrances, one built higher than the other. An above-ground breeze blows across the higher hole faster than the lower hole, causing a partial vacuum. This causes air to enter the lower hole and blow out of the higher domed crater. But does this mean that prairie dogs are experts at air conditioning as well?
The prairie dogs in building their burrow systems don't need to understand the principle upon which it works. We can imagine it evolving simply by saying that in the distant past, prairie dogs or their ancestors that built burrow systems which ventilated well were more successful, produced more offspring than individuals that produce poor ventilation systems.
Above ground, prairie dogs frequently chatter to each other. Some scientists now believe the various sounds are specific words, conveying their conditions and surroundings. While the complexity of their language is still open to debate, there's no uncertainty about the meaning when the watchdog stationed at the top of the mound speaks. If a predator approaches, he will bark out a warning so the rest can run for cover.
Hence the name prairie dog. Well, they'll stand up on their hind legs and make this yip, yip noise. Then boom, that is everybody takes safe refuge in the burrows. And so that's what they end up doing. And then after 10 or 15 minutes, depending on when they feel it's safe, little heads will start popping up and they'll see that the coast is clear. Okay, let's go back to our feeding and grooming and lazing out in the sun.
Ever since the settlement of North America's Great Plains, ranchers and farmers have considered prairie dogs pests that ate the same grasses as cattle. They have been hunted and poisoned, and over time their numbers have been greatly reduced. Luckily for prairie dogs, many now consider their position in the ecosystem of the plains less harmful, and they're not being eradicated as quickly as they were in the past. While some animals go underground to avoid being hunted, others do just the opposite, burrowing to become expert hunters. We've become successful hunters in large part because of the hunting tools we've engineered. But like us, there are some very special members of the animal kingdom that also engineer devices to augment their hunting capabilities. Spider webs are probably the most commonly thought of traps built by non-human hunters. More than 35,000 species of spiders have been identified, with new ones being discovered constantly. They're all predators, and most use their spinnerets to make silken and often gooey traps. But while the typical orb web, strung up to catch insects that accidentally fly into it, is an impressive engineering feat, it's really a passive form of hunting. The ogre-faced spider takes a much more proactive approach to snacking a meal.
The ogre-faced spider is so named because of its remarkable eyes. Most spiders have 8 eyes, and in the case of the ogre-faced spider, 2 of these eyes are huge. They're much bigger than the others. They can see a clear image under very low light. This is a preserved specimen of an ogre-faced spider. The scientific name Dinopus means horrible eyes, and it's very aptly named.
Ogre-faced spiders live throughout the warmer parts of the world, from the southern United States to southern Africa and Australia. Like most orb web building spiders, they use their spinnerets to weave a small web, but with a big difference.
The ogre-faced spider is unique in the world of spiders in that it constructs a web that it physically holds in its legs. The web that it constructs is a squarish structure with zigzag lines going in varying directions. The spider then hangs in an area where insects are walking by. When a hapless insect happens to walk by, what the ogre-faced spider does is it takes its square silk frame, flings it physically on the insect, and then it raises it off the ground and starts jiggling it back and forth. The more it jiggles the insect, the more entangled it becomes in the silk framework, and that allows it then to be bitten and eventually the animal's consumed.
The ogre-faced spider isn't alone in its ability to use its web in an innovative way. Another amazing arachnid uses a single line of silk with the skill of a rodeo champion.
The bola spider is so named because of analogy to Argentinian gauchos who use a bolas, which is a leather thong with a stone at each end. They swing this around and they hurl it at running animals. It entangles their legs, brings them down, and lets the cowboy, the gaucho, catch them. The bola spider does something a little bit like that. The bola spider makes a remarkable catching web. It's a single silken line at the tip of which is a large blob of sticky silk, gluey silk. The spider itself produces a smell of perfume, which is like the sex perfume of moths. And so male moths will fly upwind toward this wonderful perfume, hoping to find a female moth with which they can mate.
And what the bola spider does is, in order to both get the perfume spread around and in order to catch their prey, is they spin it. They spin the line with this gob of glue and pheromones on the bottom of it. When the moth comes over, whack, it gets hit. They drag them in and suck them dry.
Not all spiders use their web-spinning capabilities to create sticky death traps to snare their prey. Trapdoor spiders are famous for their secret hatches, from which they make surprise attacks. If that was too fast for you, here's an instant replay.
This is a ball of adobe soil. It's very hard, and in this ball of soil is the burrow of a trapdoor spider. You can see the door falling open like this. Trapdoor spiders burrow into the ground, or they occupy crevices in rock walls or tree trunks. And they line their burrow with silk, and at the end of this burrow, they produce this remarkable trapdoor, which, when closed, makes the burrow very, very difficult to see.
It often takes a trained eye to spot the door designed to blend in with the surroundings. And many trapdoor spiders are less than hospitable to unwelcome visitors.
Quite often in the field, when you come up and try to open the burrow door, you'll sometimes discover that the resident spider is on the other side having a tug of war with you to keep the door shut. And that's not just because they're concerned about you, a human. The reality is that these spiders have enemies. There are wasps that physically land on the ground near the burrow doorway. They physically then try to lift the burrow and go inside, sting the resident spider and paralyze it. And we'll try this with this particular one and see what in fact it does. And indeed, it is struggling to keep the door shut against my probe. Back in the 1940s, one of these burrows of a large trapdoor spider such as this was wired up to a grocery scale, and it was discovered that the spider would not release its hold until a force equivalent to 140 times its body weight had been applied to the burrow entryway.
Trapdoor spiders are also powerful diggers and excavate burrows up to a foot or more deep.
Yeah, trapdoor spiders have a rake on their jaws. This rake is used to dig in the ground. They will scrape particles of earth from the walls of the burrow, and they'll carry it to the end of the burrow, where they can actually sometimes throw it for a considerable distance, so that no buildup of debris around the burrow would serve to give it away to any potential enemy.
As the burrow is being excavated, the spider uses its spinnerets to line it with silk. This not only helps hold the earthen walls in place, but it also provides a comfy nest to raise their young, and enables the spider to quickly travel up to its door, which is made of a mixture of silk, earth, and other organic material.
There's particular attention paid to the edge to make sure that it fits snugly with the rim of the burrow. If these are constructed perfectly and the door is shut, water will actually tend not to go inside.
Most trapdoor spiders hunt at night and wait patiently behind their door, sometimes with it slightly ajar. Certain types of trapdoor spiders lay silken lines that radiate out from their door to act as tripwires. If something walks by and taps or stumbles on one of these lines of web, the vibrations let the spider know dinner has arrived.
Others have no such lines, but all have extremely acute senses of vibration detection. They can locate, range, and assess the size of any passing creature. They can tell from the vibrations whether this is an ant or a beetle, or they can determine if it's something larger, like a frog or a lizard. And if they determine that, they'll keep the door shut tight.
Trapdoor spiders have carved out a comfortable and secretive niche for themselves behind their cleverly devised and disguised lairs. But they aren't the only hunters lying in wait beneath the ground. While in its larval stage, one variety of a dragonfly-like insect, called an antlion, digs a cone-shaped death trap in fine soil or sand. When digging its pit, the antlion uses its head and jaws to flick dirt out, but does it in such a way that the walls of its crater are lined with finer soil particles, resulting in a steeper and more slippery slope.
Throws them at 45-degree angle, which is the way in which you can get the furthest distance for the amount of effort you put into your throwing. Then the larger particles travel further. So just by throwing the particles out, it throws the bigger particles further than it throws the smaller particles.
Once the antlion finishes digging its pit, it buries itself at the bottom with only its head and jaws exposed.
And eventually, ant or a caterpillar or something will walk through that area and stumble over the edge of one of the pits. And as it starts tumbling down the sides, the larvae will start flicking sand up at it to make sure that it goes all the way to the bottom. And then it will drag it under the surface.
The aggressive antlion then seizes its prey with its enormous piercing, sucking mandibles, paralyzes it with poison injected at the first bite, and proceeds to suck out its vital juices. When finished, it throws the drained, lifeless body out of its pit and lays in wait for its next victim. Fortunately for all of us bigger members of the animal kingdom, these monstrous trappers only grow to a maximum size of about half an inch. It's a dangerous world out there, but for every creature that has figured out how to build a better mousetrap, there is another that has designed a home to keep the predators away. Most people are content to live in homes made from a variety of building materials. But for members of the bird world, that variety, the twigs, leaves, and grasses, is a matter of convenience. But just as some people choose to be nonconformists or have to improvise because of climate or availability of supplies, many animal engineers build distinctive dwellings as well. While most birds build a nest up in a tree, woodpeckers use their strong pointed beaks like chisels and crowbars to carve out a home in the tree itself. Males and females would work together to excavate a hole suitable for nesting. These fairly small birds weigh only a few ounces, but are able to jackhammer their way even into hardwood trees like oak and maple.
As the bird hits its head, essentially, against the tree trunk by trying to dig a hole by hitting very hard the point of the chisel against the tree, its brain would get shaken around if it wasn't for some special design features in the skull. The way in which the beak is inset into the skull ensures that the shock waves largely bypass the brain, and also there are specialist muscles which act as shock absorbers.
In Arizona's treeless desert, Gila woodpeckers have found a substitute place to excavate a home.
If you look behind me, you see the saguaro cactus, the icon of the Sonoran Desert here in southern Arizona. This plant is a very common home of the Gila woodpecker. It's a 2-inch roughly wide hole dug into the plant, and the hole, it looks like goes straight in from perhaps this viewpoint, but drops down into a boot-shaped or perhaps a bottleneck gourd-shaped cavity. Great advantage of nesting in the saguaro cactus is that it provides cooling effect. The tissues are moisture-filled, perhaps 80% water content. That provides a good barrier against an outdoor ambient temperature that might be up to 110 degrees.
Many species of much larger birds called hornbills also nest in holes in trees, but they're unable to chip out their own homes and must find already existing cavities. In the predator-filled tropics, hornbills go one step further than woodpeckers. They build a front door.
The way in which they do this is that males go out and swallow mud and then regurgitate to the female this sticky mud, and the female then builds it up into a wall which is almost complete except for a narrow vertical slit.
Locked away from the outside world, the female relies on the male to feed her through the narrow opening. Once the eggs hatch, the female breaks out and works with the male to feed their growing brood. While woodpeckers and hornbills go to a lot of trouble to construct their nests within trees, another winged animal has found a way to quickly create makeshift shelters out of just the leaves. The tent is a long-time standard in survivalist gear, but tent bats discovered the value of this simple yet effective structure long before we did.
They are probably, in my opinion, amongst the most beautiful of all bats. Some species are pure white with beautiful yellow faces and yellow ears. And they'll not only take a group of leaves and cut the veins and then pull them down so that the leaf makes an automatic little teepee kind of structure or a tent, but they'll also do it with big plants like banana plants.
In order to make this kind of leaf into a shelter, they bite through the veins that branch off the midrib that runs down the center of it.
Starting probably up this end, they would go and bite through that vein and that vein and that vein, fairly close to the midrib there, until doing it all the way down here, that side would collapse. And then similarly on the other side, so the other side would collapse to create a kind of folded structure like that, giving it protection against the rain.
The bats then roost up in the apex of the tent. It offers protection from sunshine and rain. The lack of a floor enables the bats to keep an eye out for any predators that may be approaching below. For those of us with a sense of wanderlust, we have invented trailers and mobile homes. For travel in hostile environments, we have created armored personnel carriers. In streams and ponds, the aquatic caddisworm, a larvae of the caddisfly, has to make its own protective mobile home to survive. Hatched in the water, the defenseless worm is a favorite food of fish. Using its sticky saliva, it glues together a covering of rocks and other available materials.
This caddis case I have here almost certainly illustrates a design which has anti-predator features. So what you see is the tube in which the animal lives is this middle dark bit here, and you can just see the entrance of the tube there. But stuck onto the front end, or projecting well beyond the front end of the tube, is quite a large, thick stick. And then projecting beyond the back end are 3 thin sticks, so that you can see that the overall length of the structure is almost double the length of the caddis larva itself. Now, if you imagine a fish with a relatively small mouth trying to actually grab hold of that and swallow it, then it's much more difficult with these bits stuck on, projecting from either end.
Once the caddis worm metamorphoses into a caddis fly, its mobile home is cast off into nature's junkyard. But as impressive as this bit of insect engineering is, it's dwarfed by the efforts of ants. Our ability to work as a unified, multi-skilled force has resulted in engineering miracles. Strangely, the closest parallel to these sorts of complex creations exists in some of the least human and tiniest inhabitants of our planet, the ants. There are over 8,000 species of ants. Some challenge our preconceptions about these very industrious insects. Weaver ants live in the rainforest, where it is impractical to build a typical ant colony beneath the often rain-soaked ground. Instead, they climb into the trees to craft their houses out of leaves.
What they've learned is that they can go up and, as a team, pull leaves together. Then they grab their larvae and squeeze them like a toothpaste tube, and that actually creates this silken web that they actually use to sew the leaves together. And so what happens is they form a structure, a very solid structure, high up in the tree, and it's quite impressive.
Squeezing the silk from the larvae without harming them to sew their nests together is a remarkably complex behavior. Weaver ants also exhibit interesting defensive maneuvers. If their nest is disturbed, the ants make an intimidating sound by tapping on the leaves.
When a person opens up these weaver nests, they'll find that the adults are nervously tapping. I've seen it. They'll make quite a ruckus as they nervously tap the substrate of the leaves. It could be for communication. It could be to release a chemical. It could be that the noise is just meant to drive off a predator.
The whole nest starts to click as they're shaking on the leaves. And then they all run out and look at you with their front legs kind of standing out this way, saying, "Come a little closer, my friend." And then if they bite you, they actually spray an acid that makes it feel like you're dissolving. And it's one of the things that keeps people and other things away from them.
Army ants are also experts at construction, only their creations are built out of their own bodies. Like a troupe of precision acrobats, these ants quickly communicate and coordinate to assemble themselves into ladders, roads, and other structures by linking their legs together. When on the march, if they come to a gap that needs to be crossed, they will build a living bridge.
So what will happen is they'll start to form like building blocks. One will start, second, and they start to build up, and then it starts to form out. And then you start getting a curtain. You'll get one or two ants that'll be stretched out as thin as possible, just holding on. The next one will come up, and then they'll add another third block. And before long, you've got this actual bridge, and then the rest of the colony just comes racing across. And then once they're through, they dismantle the same way. The back one lets go, then they carry it back on until they're across the obstacle.
One of the most important structures they assemble themselves into is a home for their queen. Army ants are nomadic, and their queen must be protected and given a place to replenish the workforce.
They're called bivouacs. And the way they do this is by one ant hooking onto another ant, and another ant hooking onto another ant, and making curtains of ants that form this ball that comes down out of a tree or in a hollow in an old branch. And then they make platforms inside of that, and on that they keep their babies and the queen and their pupa, etc. So this is actually their home.
They'll form a bivouac in a hurry if they sense their queen is in danger, and the curtains of ants are like living chainmail.
It's very tough. It's like Velcro when you pull them apart, and yet they form these bridges and curtains with their bodies and their legs. It is engineering, and it's in a grand scale.
If army ants are the insect world's most amazing acrobats, leafcutter ants are horticultural geniuses when it comes to farming. Their unusual multi-step method of harvesting one crop in order to grow another, a certain fungus for which they've developed an appetite, rivals human agricultural accomplishments.
Leafcutter ants are incredible. They have achieved a very high sophistication in terms of farming. What they've done is they've learned to take food, a different variety of greens, and take them back to the nest, mash them up, and in conjunction with this fungus that they live with, it's a symbiotic relationship. The fungus can't live without them, nor they without the fungus.
It takes a lot of freshly harvested greens to grow enough fungus to feed the colony. So scouts are constantly searching for new supplies. When a leafcutter scout finds a suitable bush or tree, it lays a scent trail to let the forager ants know where it is. The ants that cut the vegetation have two sets of jaws. The outer pair is used for carrying objects and for digging, and the inner pair is used for chewing.
And so as they cut, they wiggle, they move their jaws back and forth to cut. But what makes it even more efficient is that they vibrate like a kitchen knife, and that vibration makes these work quicker. So bzzz, 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 and that's how they can cut the leaves much more efficiently than they would if they were just biting them with their jaws.
Once the leaves are cut, the ants pick up the pieces and begin the often very long trek back to the nest.
The leafcutter ant, when it's moving, actually will form a path, like a highway in the forest. It'll denude this whole area of grass, of leaves, of twigs, and it'll just be dirt. It's a big highway. Some of these are a couple inches across.
When the foragers get to the nest, they hand off the leaves to smaller ants that then rush them to one of the many culture gardens. The leaves are chewed into smaller and smaller fragments by smaller and smaller ants, then placed into the nutrient-demanding fungus.
This is Arizona. It's called Atta mexicana, but it's actually an Arizona leafcutter ant, and it's one of the biggest ones found in the United States. And if you look right there, you can see the queen. She's the founder. When I picked her up out in the desert, she just had a little ball of fungus under her jaw, and I put her in a container, and she raised the fungus up, and now it's turned into this ball of fungus. And this colony here is about 3 months old.
Like most social insects, one leafcutter queen can generate an enormous number of new individuals over time.
Probably the biggest social insect colonies you get are found among ants, and leafcutter ants are probably supreme among those. So you're getting colony sizes of something like 5 to 8 million. Now, I come from Scotland, and the population of Scotland is only 5.5 million. So we're talking about, in one building, as many insects as there are people in the whole of Scotland.
To accommodate a population of this size, a long-established leafcutter colony's underground nest can become gigantic.
Think about yourself as having X-ray eyes. What you would see are fungus balls that range from the size of about an orange to about the size of a basketball, and there would be thousands of them all laid out underground. And then there would be these tunnels that go down even deeper into these midden piles where the old fungus is thrown away, that's no longer good for food. And that some of those chambers that are deep underground are so big that you could actually stand in them. And that's how far, and they go down and down. And nobody's ever really dug one of these giant colonies all the way to the bottom because the hole gets so deep that they're afraid it's going to cave in on them.
Their colonies can flourish because leafcutters vigilantly protect their fungus cultures from disease and invading fungi pests. In addition to physically removing any unwanted invading varieties of fungi that may start growing in their garden, these ants employ antibiotics produced by bacteria living on their bodies to help keep their crop healthy. This balancing act between ant, bacteria, and fungus, along with their backbreaking fieldwork, makes leafcutters one of nature's most impressive engineers.